Sweet. Alright. Hello everyone, happy Saturday. It is January 26th on ZBrush Live. I'm Tony Leonard. I'm a concept artist based out of Los Angeles, California. And today I'll be doing some things with hard surface design and ZBrush. Kind of lending to some themes that we've dabbled in before, but taking it a little bit more of a step forward. I'm going to be messing with Moi today, in addition to ZBrush, and doing a few other things that I'm going to show you guys. I'm really excited to show you. I'm going to do a little bit of a sketch and kind of fill you in on some models that I've been working on recently, like the one in the image that was provided for this stream. So let's get started. Just give me just a second. I'm going to check. I just want to make sure. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Make sure everybody can hear me okay. If you guys can't hear me very well or anything of the sort, please drop me a line in the various chats, I believe, in between YouTube, Facebook, and also over Twitch. Should be getting feeds from all three, so give me a moment when you ask questions, and I'll try to make sure to keep looking at the screen while I'm working and explaining things, and we'll go along with it. So do drop me any questions there or anything that you have, and I'll be sure to try to pay attention to the various windows and get an answer to you guys. Alright, so let's see here. Alright, hello everyone, and there we are. Okay, so I wanted to start off and show you guys sort of some things that I've been working with. One is, I'm going to skip over to Photoshop here. Boop. Maybe also Bridge. And I'm going to go up and open a few things. Boop, boop. There we go. So I have been hard at work building out a little project and experimenting using Blender. And of course, because I'm a ZBrush user, I'm always looking for ways to sort of integrate the two in between ZBrush and other packages. I mean, a lot of times for work purposes, I end up using Maya as a 3D package, but more recently I've been switching and trying to integrate more Blender, and also very specifically a friend of mine's add-on, HardOps, which is a great add-on for Blender. And of course, you know, for those that are familiar, Blender is a open source, free 3D application, and so I've been doing a lot of integration of using things that I block out and model, also sculpt in ZBrush, and bringing those over to Blender and either rendering them in the new Blender 2.8 EV renderer, or a lot of times in final result, when I do a lot of paint overs and or just beauty shots of things, I send a lot of my models over to Octane, specifically Octane 4. So I've been sort of developing this process that I really wanted to share with people and sort of acquaint myself with, in using ZBrush, Blender, Moi, and finally, either the Blender renderer or for look dev work, or in final just using Octane 4. So I may be dabbling in between different apps today. I hope no one minds, or even I hope that my friends over at Pixo don't mind. But yeah, I mean, it's always going to be that way that you may find yourself using more than one application for a lot of things. Now, a lot of the things that I'm going to cover, some of them you can probably do alone in ZBrush, and where I can, I'll try to explain how I would do things in ZBrush alone. But I will be sort of intermixing things today between different packages. So, but just to give you guys a preview, a lot of the stuff that I've been working up, like the mech that you see here on my screen in Photoshop, most of these were done in ZBrush. Like the figure character was a concept mesh, between ZBrush, doing like some of the panel looping and whatnot for the chest, head, and some of the back pieces, maybe a little bit of kitbash here and there, using curves for a lot of the straps and whatnot. And then, a lot of these, I put materials on, or give all of the objects material IDs via Blender. And for those that don't know, material IDs are a little bit different than, say, something like polypaint. Like, none of this was polypainted. It's actually a material plus its color and all of the specular and roughness settings that go along with each material. And then that's just propagated around for, sort of figuring out a color scheme. So this is basically sort of like a look dev preview in Blender EV, just as a render. It's very much like Keyshot in a way, where I would make up a material, add certain procedural textures, like maybe like a normal to give it some bump or something like that. Or if I come in ZBrush and I did all ZBrush sculpting, I would sculpt up a piece, maybe use some alphas on the piece or something like that, or like noisemaker for the texture of the object, and then I would decimate it probably to retain some of its detail, or either maybe in Octane do procedural mapping, which is basically just box mapping, not even to the UVs, or so like a lot of this stuff, it doesn't even have UVs to it. It's just like a concept build, but it uses polygons and possibly a lot of ingons in a triangulated mesh. So a lot of times when you work with some other packages, you might get hard surfaces or either kitbashes or something that use triangulation, and so all of the polys are more so like tries or something like that, and it reduces a lot of the poly count, and it keeps and retains hard shape because there's no subdivision happening, right? So some objects get some subdivision and some don't, and then there are some other pieces where I've had to retopologize and do that sort of thing. But for the most part, a lot of this is just triangulated or decimated meshes, and it retains a lot of detail pretty well, right? So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of how I build up some of these, some of the geometry for these. And so today I'm going to try to maybe make like an example mech where maybe like a crawler or something like that, a walker, and do some hard shapes and sort of show you different Boolean systems that we can use to obtain some of these shapes. A lot of these, they're not just kit bashes, they're actually like concept meshes, where I will piece together body parts or do an overall block out, and then where I can, I may use, like say for the joints, some of my own kit bashing, or maybe a few pieces from a few other different kits, but try to generate a lot of the geometry by myself. The thing about kit bashing is when you use it, it's always a great idea to maybe make some pieces or parts that are within your own visual style and consistent to your own sort of look dev. That way when you sort of distribute it with other pieces, you sort of get a more consistent look, and you can sort of gauge how much your own look is in step with a lot of your other kit bash pieces that you might try to integrate. And you can see sort of how you can balance things. Like this gun here required a lot of different pieces. The chain was probably done from a friend of mine's kit bash, Ara Karamakian, great ZBrush sculptor. A long time ago we swapped some brushes, and he gave me a sample of his I guess it's like a 20mm ammo feed chute, like something typically you find on a military type weapon or something like that. But mixing it and a few other pieces, even coming up and blocking out pieces like the shield and so forth, all of the feet, and the mechanics in between, a lot of those were kit bashed, some of which are from my own kit bashes, by the way. So let's move on. I'm going to show a few others, just a few other views, just to sort of give you an idea of what is possible in this. And so here's like a nice little screenshot I just took, sort of an overhead look. But yeah, just used a QMesh and ZBrush for certain objects, like sort of like the knife. Used some kit bashes in and around the arm, elbow, and then I had to go in and probably use some of my own kit for like the hand, and then I just used sort of like in Blender some some batch operations to put, some of the materials, distribute them around, and sort of activate different colors to come up with a color scheme. But you can set a lot of the specularity and roughness, and you can even drop in like a texture map for the color texture or diffuse, and then you can also propagate that like maybe as a grayscale, like a dirt pattern that you can put in and sort of get some nice grime and whatnot to the material by using it in sort of like the specular channel, right? So this is also some things, which is some things that I'll probably try to do over in Octane. I'm just going to take a little skip over here, and then I'm going to come back to ZBrush. But just to give you an idea, this is something that I'm currently working on, right? It's a different mech design and has a lot of intricate small cuts. What does kitbashing mean in this sense? Kitbashing is basically where, let's say for example in ZBrush, when you have a brush that has an insert multi-mesh brush, like it has multiple meshes in it that you can choose from. Let's say I'm gonna choose like just a basic primitive, like a cube, put it in there. I'm gonna make it editable, make polymesh 3D, right? And then I'm going to move it around. And if I look at it, it's just this. It hasn't been really initialized or anything. But let's say if I use this as a base, and I use, like, say, one of my own kits here, and I hit M on the keyboard, this would be a kitbash, say. It's just a lot of different random gizmos or objects or even shapes that you can use. And when paired into a composition, basically you can sort of compose an object or a model or anything. You could use maybe a Dynamesh for just like a basic shape, and as long as there's no subdivision to the object, you can be able to just simply apply a shape to it, right? So let's say I want a panel. I'm going to put this panel dead center here, and I stretch and draw it out, right? And then I can take this, actually it wasn't in symmetry, let's try that again. So if I hit X, it's going to draw it on the other side, of course. I'll just nicely draw this out, right? And of course if I like split this off, it would become its own subtool, right, separate from that. So every time you draw it on an object, it's probably going to mask the object, the parent object, and then the actual applied insert multi-mesh will be sitting on the surface unselected. But then you can just split mask points and separate the two objects apart, and then this is a free piece that you can use or compose with, make a different shape with. If you just wanted to use the box to hold the shape and put other panels here, you could do something like that. But it's just various kit that you can put on an object. Like let's say if I do this, I do this. Oops. Let's split that one more time. I'm going to delete. There we go. So that, and on top of this, I'm going to draw another. And of course, a lot of these shapes you can manipulate them, turning them by using the W key, which is the same as the move key for transpose, except in this case now in 2018 we have a gizmo, so I can take this and just rotate. I can shift and rotate and lock to like 5 degrees of the degree axis, right? And then I can space this out, and then I can separate this. Oop. See here. Something's hidden. There we go. Split mask points. And then I think something got joined here by accident, but either way, to solve that I can hit W, hit Control, click on whatever is polygrouped, like say here, and then it'll select this object, and then I can split mask points. Now normally my UI is a little different than most, but I've made just a little custom, but you can hold control and basically slide your top nav bar of tools, the top of your interface. You can slide it over, and I've just simply enabled the config. So in other words, just enable customize, and then you can put a lot of these buttons in here by yourself and just sort of customize some extra tools. So like I have an extended bar of things that I commonly use off to the side, and it's pretty handy. But getting back to Kitbash, yeah, that's basically sort of how it goes. I would use different pieces. I might combine another body shell or something like that, or I could use another kit that I've made. Hit the Q and then maybe M again, and I can see what kind of shapes that I have here, and then I can use another shape and sort of draw on a surface and basically insert a mesh, right? And so I can sort of compose something of a mech design this way, or I can add details to it. A lot of times what I've been doing is doing simple blockouts, and then I cut those blockouts out, and then I sculpt on them, and then I worry about the topology probably lastly, and then go ahead and render it. So in a lot of ways, probably in the end, if it's just for a concept or something, that just a proof of concept, what I'll do is I'll use the decimation master and probably decimate things out, and then bring those over to Octane for a render, or Keyshot for a render, and then lastly Photoshop and Lightroom, right? So let's switch over, because we're going to kind of get around to a few different things. So this guy, this is a rendered view in Octane of the current mech that I'm building. And just to show you, this is basically just a setup with a ramp, right? And it has a few lights above, and I would actually have to go to the nodes and turn those on so you can sort of see how this is set. But for these, I'll change the opacity to 1. And basically these are just small polyplanes that I put in as an OBJ, and then they've been turned into an emissive light by turning on the emission to black body. If there are those of you that are messing around with Octane or experimenting with it, Octane works in a lot of different apps. They have probably bundles that you can use on Maya, Blender, and also C4D. I'm using for Blender and also for C4D, but a lot of these settings you can probably carry over, right? So I'm using the actual standalone version of version 4, which is really nice, really fast. It's using both of my GPUs, which are basically TI cards, NVIDIA TI cards, and they're working together and rendering fairly fast for each preview that I get. So as I do a turnaround here, I just set some lights, usually above at sort of like a 45-degree angle, and then set up a ramp just for previewing. And a lot of times what I've done is I save the same scene, and so every time I open up Octane, I have it basically ready to go. I could just plop a model in, and it's sort of a technique that I really very much explored and learned from Vitaly Bulgarov, who did some really fantastic Octane rendering as of late. He's just cooking on it, but watching and sort of learning from and taking cues from him, just about lighting has just been really paying off very nicely, because Octane has some very nice rich shadows and different passes that you can turn on, and then you can basically set like a final render resolution, and then just render and let it go, and within seconds all of the little rendering pixels go away. You can if you're placing your cards right for the emission, you can get some nice pickups of light to really sort of explore the depth of the shapes and really bring out a lot of those Boolean cuts together. So I'll just take a quick turn around the object. You're probably going to see I have like a basic HDRI that I set when I was in downtown LA some months ago. I took a Gear 360 and shot a bunch of HDRIs, so I have a few that I like to toy with for specific lighting. But within the lighting, the HDRI is very general, it seems, almost, because you're going to combine it with your overhead lights, and so probably the light that would be cast from the HDRI is a little bit different than what you would think as it hits the model. And then with the additional light of having emissive planes actually projected on the object, right? So it's more white, you know, within the light, and I can actually change the temperature. So if you change the temperature for a specific light, it becomes a little bit warmer or cooler, depending. So you know, you can always click here and sort of get more like reddish or warmer hot tones, like a high yellow, or like a yellow lamp or something like that. And then you can switch it all the way to the end of its spectrum, which will be like a sort of like a cooler temperature, right? So like on the left side of the scale, just think warmer. On the right on the hand of the scale, just think cooler, right? And then of course your temperature, or the actual power of the light, would be dependent on the power scale. So you can just really scale it up and then just dial it back a hair. You can actually use like the scroll wheel to sort of go up and down with some of these values, right? So it looks very cool. And then just as a quick shortcut, every time you change views, you're going to probably need to refocus your camera. So you can set like sort of just hit F, which will turn into the autofocus picker, and just pick a point at which you're going to be focusing in on, right? And it should handle the rest, the focusing for the rest. But of course, in your nodes, you can always set depth of field. Probably like post-processing or render kernel can handle a lot of that stuff. Also, a lot of the glare power of some of your highlights, if you have anything like bloom or anything set like that. Right now, most of those things are turned off because I just want to take a look at the model in a sort of flat way, and then just see how lights hit it. You know, I would probably use Keyshot for exactly the same thing. It's just I think my rendering for GPU is maybe a little bit faster here, and I wanted to try to show you guys something a little bit off to the side that's probably useful, right? So, okay, so let's go back. Now, I want to show you also the source file for this, because it's a little bit difficult to explain this pipeline, but I am using Moi for basically just a 3D blockout. And what's amazing about Moi is a parametric modeling software, which mostly is used for like CAD type files. It has like a different system of doing booleans, chamfers, cutting through objects, and you can use some really awesome curves to sort of draw out some shapes and then pluck those shapes out. So say, for example, if you see here, looking from the right side, all of these silhouette planes were just poly draw tools that I can make, and I'll just use like a simple polyline, for example. I'm actually going to make a new file for this once I get working here, and sort of just take some time to sort of freestyle it and draw something out for you guys to sort of show you what I'm up to. All right. So basically, I just draw points. Sort of a point and click, and some of these don't have to be straight. You can actually do freeform Belgier curves or Bezier curves, however you would like to pronounce that one. But I can just slide this over. I'll go into 3D view, do a quick turn. For those that are interested, Moi is available from their site. Moi actually stands for Moment of Inspiration, and it's called Moi 3D is the app. I have an actual skin with some scripts and stuff that I've sort of changed the look of my Moi, and also you'll probably need like a hotkey setup for it, but you can get your hands on this thing. I think it's about a little less than 300 for the software, but well worth it and well handy. It's a very simple, sort of robust CAD type of software, right? So I'm just going to highlight this and do an extrude, and I'll check this to do both sides, and I'll make a distance. And so already this is a nice block that I don't have to sit and poly model out or chop up polys over. It's just basically I'm taking the silhouette and extruding it into 3D, and then I'll just take this center line and cut it out using Control X. And then I'll save a lot of these various parts out as OBJs. So, like say for example, I'll select this one and then do a file export. And then when you export, let's see, I'll just name this really quick. There we go. So I'll save this really quick. So now it brings up a dialog in which I can select how many polygons it's going to have. Like it's sort of like its polygon count. It's a very kind of almost like non-specific number, but it seems to be more in step with the angle that it produces. So I'm just going to actually try out something here really quick that I was looking at. So I'm actually going to set this to Ingon. So that way, when I move out of here, I'm going to actually open this up in Blender really quick, or show you how I've opened it up in Blender, and then, you know, forward on to ZBrush, because there's a couple of different steps we will need to take. Like this way, I don't have to worry about triangles or even quads for the most part. Because if I save it as Ingon, Blender should open up Ingons perfectly and be able to view it, and I won't have any split faces or holes in it, right? Otherwise, I would have to probably save it triangulated and bring it straight into ZBrush. But in this case, I want to do a couple of other steps, specifically highlighting some features from Blender's HardOps, which is an add-on by MasterXeon1001. Great tool for it. And it really holds up, especially when I bring objects over to ZBrush later. Like I'm going to actually do an export and sort of show you guys how those things come in and how we can work with them and actually edit them over, right? So for example's sake here, I have the torso blocked out, and what I would do is probably do more polygons, and we'll sort of see how it ends up. And then I'm going to make a couple of other settings. So in and around 6 for the angle. Let's do smaller here. And then I'm going to try to do maybe 0.2 for smaller than, and 2 for here. And when I do that, basically you can see sort of how it distributes a lot of the loops in the objects, in which, you know, I may actually clean these up by the time that I get to Blender, but just for now, for simplicity's sake, I want to give it, you know, just a little bit more geometry and see how it does. So let's see. Oop, not that. That. Not too much different. So what it's doing is it's putting a couple of loops in here that are making Ingons, but that's alright. I might be able to use some of those. And actually I can always take this mesh and sort of edit it. Either, you know, using the Z modeler tool, or even in Blender I can sort of, you know, just take the verts and start joining those and sort of solve a lot of the loops, adding and subtracting. So basically sort of doing a reduction. But since I'm going to be doing some cuts, I really don't have to worry about it, right? I want these for the solid shapes, and I want to be able to take and have clean edges so that I can take those and even, you know, bevel and chamfer those. Now, one might ask why I wouldn't do a lot of the beveling here in the CAD software. And for some objects, yes, like especially if I'm making smaller parts, but really I just want to sort of think abstractly, right? I don't want to make an overly complex or overly boolean object just quite yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and then when it saves out, I can come over to someplace like Blender. I'm going to open it, and then I open the pieces here, and it looks like this. This has been worked on for maybe over the last week, maybe a few different nights. I've come in here and done some detail, but I really wanted to push it and bring you guys a design that you can look at and sort of see how it looks, right? See how it's processed, right? Because what I'm sort of doing is trying to develop a new workflow for myself, and use various tools to just sort of produce one specific type of look, you know? So here, I'm going to actually make sure I'm paying attention to your comments with you guys. Am I using version 4 of... no, I think actually I've held off on upgrading just out of laziness. I should. But I'm using a previous version. I believe it's version 3. and then I didn't change it or update it because I didn't want to have to maybe mess around with you know, tinkering with it, like because you have to customize a lot of its hotcuts or shortcut keys, and I think you have to enter a script, which I got one from a friend and put it in just for the UI because I loved the darker theme, right? But once I get to Blender, this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm using Blender with its hard ops tools. And so, you know, a lot of the basic pieces that we made, I actually left a few in here that I hadn't gotten to. But just to sort of show you how this works out, I'm going to go from Look Dev. And by the way, for aficionados of Blender, I'm hitting the Z key for the pie menu here and going over to Solid and Look Dev. And I'm doing, you know, just looks in between those, right? I do love Solid because you can add a lot of matte caps and sort of pick up some specularity from the shapes. When you turn on everything else, especially like say for example I'm going to hit Alt V on the keyboard and bring up you know, all of the rendering quality. You can change a lot of the matte cap and materials here. So like just say for example I Alt V and I go from this sort of shiny matte cap to something darker or more metallic, and it has some very nice looks that I could sort of proof out and really see how light reacts with a lot of the different cuts. And then for this specifically, because, and here this is a very important step, because I want to be taking a lot of these pieces over to ZBrush, one of the things that I'm not going to really try to use too much when I export things is turning on what HardOps has as a C sharpen. Right, so if you've ever used HardOps and then you've used C sharpen basically allows me to go in and put a B width around objects, and it's a modifier that will give me beveling. So say for example I come down here, I take a piece, I'm gonna GY and move this forward, and then I'm gonna want to start sculpting in on this piece. So I'm not going to actually use any sculpting components ever, probably from Blender. It's not exactly my favorite, but there are those that use it and have some really great results. But I want to do mostly just really hard surface editing here, right? And so I can hit Q, or actually let me select the object. Let me bring my toggle overlays over so you can see which geometry I'm picking. Let's see, hide this actually so that we're not visually distracted. And so then we're going to work on this piece, yeah? And so what I'm going to do is generally I would take and hit Q, C sharpen, Q, B, and then that would be, you know, the B width, right? And if I slide this along, I can get a nice bevel, which gives it a nice soft shaded look. But I probably don't want to go too thick here. And then I would start cutting, right? And this is sort of like just a bevel that I use because, you know, when you look at a hard surface object, more times than not, you're probably not going to have absolute sharpness of edge. Things that are molded are probably going to have like a more dull finished surface end. Excuse me for one moment. Sorry about that. I had to kick my oldest boy out of the room. Anyway, so, you know, I'm just going to put a bevel on it, and then I'm going to start doing some cuts. Like, for example, I can hit my D menu, get an end on, and thinking within some of the angles of some of these shapes, I'm just going to start drawing out some nice planes. Thinking about, you know, these objects as cutter shapes, basically. And then I'll extrude it out. There we go. And basically what this is drawing out a shape with a nice modifier that is subtracting from the larger shape, right? So basically I can just sit back, hide those objects, cut, and keep working. And then, so of course the next step of this, one would think, well, where's your symmetry? How are you going to get a lot of the details to the other side? So Give me just a second. Now let's make a few cuts. Let's see. Like a few more. There we go. And then I'll cut out of this. Hide that. And so normally what I would do is just take this, Alt-X, and put a mirror modifier on it. And so now, because I chose this side of the X, every time I do something to affect this side, like let's say I'm going to put a circle in here. And I can bring this down, extrude it, shift clicking it when I release it or engage it. It builds the object showing, so I don't have to unhide everything. But basically, if you were to look at all of your collections, what I just did is hit the Control spacebar to bring up my collections panel, and basically everything in the scene collections, you'll see the actual shapes, and then all of these box cutter objects are going to probably be grouped in their own collection called cutters. And so those cutter objects are basically the modifier objects that are cutting out of this object, right? So I'm going to hide this. So that's looking kind of cool, and it's on both sides. And then basically I'll just do a few more. Let's change this to the side view and bring this in, right? So I'm going to come back to this just in a second and sort of make some cuts while I'm working and sort of show you guys how I'm putting this object together. But I wanted to not, ignore, of course, ZBrush. I want to come back. I want to show you guys something, because this is really great. So I'm going to bring in just a Polymesh 3D, right? And I've actually already saved a OBJ this morning of most of this torso section. So just as an example of how you would export these things out, normally what I would do is hit A and select all the objects, and then of course go from File, Import. I know I might be moving along a little bit fast, but since I know this will be recorded and rebroadcast to YouTube, I'll just sort of jump a little quickly so we can fit everything into 2 hours. Yeah. So wavefront, and of course a lot of the things that I do when I do a model like this, because it has materials on it and a lot of those IDs I would like to use, what I'm doing is selecting the drive where I want to save it, and then of course down, oh sorry, this is actually the import menu, my bad, File, Export, Wavefront OBJ, and then of course selection only. Apply modifiers, you want to make sure that that is checked, otherwise some of the modifier shape might mistakenly pop up in your OBJ, just so to make sure that all of the booleans and all of the cut lines and everything that you've done, paneling, make shapes and all of that are saved. You want to make sure to apply modifiers. Smooth groups, usually I don't check this on, but I could see where you could. But more importantly, right normals, triangulate faces is on. And down here, if you notice, there is polygroups. So I'm going to make sure that that is checked especially, and also material groups, because by the time that I come over to Octane, I want to be able to use those different material areas, and I can even enhance them into something else. So let's say, for example, I take this and I'm going to grab this model by the material slot, and you'll see here on the node that it'll actually highlight the material, and a lot of times what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll like I have a saved like a dirt image, let's see, cavity dirt mixed material, and I'll slide that in and it has the entire chain. So if I wanted to, I could actually drag this to this node and plug it into that material, and then I could edit this material like about the same color. But as you can see, a lot of the shadows and what looks like AO, like cavity dirt, has been heavily applied, and it gives it even more depth. I could even run like this. It's a nice sort of almost dirty Gundam look, right? So kind of cool stuff. It's a little too white, and of course it's that way because I'm sure some of the lights are overblown a little bit. I'd have to dial those back. So let's see, left pane, bump, not emission, but let's do the power, turn the power down. So as you can see, it looks a little bit more like a clay render when I turn the lights down. But if I hit just the right sort of amount of light, I can get some really nice effects. And of course, you know, I can change the color. So that's probably the dirt color. Here's the dirt texture, and I can change all of the parameters as far as strength, details, radius, tolerance, that sort of thing. And then I can bring the RGB color back. So I'll do something like this and bring it back sort of darker. And then this diffuse material, I could change it to something else. So I could have glossy, and then of course in that gloss material, it's still got the dirt mix in the details, but I've changed the color, and I can also probably take specular. Look at the specular node, and right now it's grayscale color, but let's say if I want to take this and add an RGB image, and I have some textures that I've been saving that I like to use procedurally for Octane. But you could just really, a lot of these, I either, if I didn't make them in something like Substance or Quixel, you can probably go out on the web and find, you know, do like a Google image search and find a nice texture. So I'm just going to take like a metal texture and put it on here. Maybe this is nice. And so it's applied, but it's only applied in the specular. So what I'm going to actually try to do is make sure that this is on box, and then if I turn this and I view somewhere with like maybe a little bit of light sheen on it, like here, and then I focus it, you can probably start to see that there's some texture in the actual metal. And so after a little bit of tweaking, I can get that to get sort of like a more polished, sort of like a rugged metal look. And it takes me a little while of tweaking some of these things, but I can change sort of some of the size and whatnot, and really pick up on some of the details of the texture. The same thing would go probably for either a bump map or a normal, and then by the time you're finished with it, you can really sort of stretch and exercise some different material breakups, right? So let's move back a little bit. I'll focus. There we go. Excuse me for one moment, please. Sorry about that. So, continuing on, I wanted to take and really quickly go into ZBrush and show you how I import this. So, I'm just using the Polymesh star because it's already a Polymesh 3D, of course. I'm going to turn the floor on just so I can see how things end up. And let's import. So I'm going to basically import over that star. It won't be staying there. And so it's just basically a placeholder so that I can import the objects over. Alright, so I'm going to go down, I think, excuse me. Sorry about that. So let's see. I need to bring in my last OBJ of this. So I've been doing some OBJs that are iteratively saved for each part. So I'm going to take F and open it. And it imported. So it looks like with not one error or hold, everything that is manifold came through in a manifold way. So now I just want to take a look at this and look at it by the polygroup, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start breaking down all of these parts, because the OBJ is actually one specific I mean it's everything is grouped together, right? And the only thing that I could use to sort of break this up is start to manage some of the polygroups, right? So because I duplicated the piece, maybe there are different polygroups on each side. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, my apologies. My son is quite anxious to fool around in here. Being a little bit of a distraction, my bad. So anyway, as I was saying, now what I need to do is basically start managing a lot of these polygroups. And so what I'm going to do is do that. Give me one sec here. Apparently, is it incorrect to use specular maps as a spec should be 1 at all times? I'm not sure about that. I change the specularity every once in a while when I'm tweaking some materials, especially in Octane. But I really don't have any specular stuff set in Blender as a material. I mean, I tweak it just a little bit, just so that I can sort of get some pickups from light and stuff like that, but I don't have a specific number that I use. ZBrush is getting used probably from now, and I'll probably have time enough to do one more exercise just to sort of show the flow, and I'll just do a sketch. But I just kind of wanted to show you from an existing model that I've been toying with and how to get it in here. So basically, to sort of hone in some of these polygroups, what I'm going to do is open up the polygroup menu, and then what I'm going to do is also group similar groups or merge similar groups. And so everything should have like the same poly count on each side. So there we go. We got them all evened out on both sides, right? And everything else I'm sure is probably worked out. Yeah, it looks the same on both sides. And if I look, the surface looks okay. And so now, especially, you know, if I wanted to start breaking things into parts, I could do like a polygroup split, or more importantly, I can start, you know, by just using the widget tool and start grabbing, you know, larger swaths or chunks of geometry. So, you know, I'll just hold Control and click it, and then I can separate, right? So split masked points on that, and then of course, if you were to look at your subtools, you know, here's the main shape, here's the shape that I just plucked out, right? If I dynamic solo that, I could work on this and this alone, right? And so now, you know, a lot of the work has already been done between like Blender, Moi, and bringing this in and just, you know, using box cutter to do a lot of booleans and stuff. I could even add booleans. So of course, like if I wanted to add anything else additionally to this, what I'll do is I'll just draw in a shape. Let's take this object for example. Actually, you know what? Let's view this by polygroup. I'm going to deselect this. I'm going to actually go back up and hide this guy. And then I want to grab, hide these off, this off. And right now it sort of becomes like a selection game. I can just sort of pick what I don't want all along one group. And I can just hide it. Until I can get like an area from which I can make a clean selection of one specific part. So I'll just hide some of the others. And then, of course, I'll use masking. And then I'll invert it and I can just say split mask points. So then I can get all of the groups that I'm getting from just the one block that I want to select, right? I want to separate this green polygroup together with this yellow one, right? Let's see. so I got this one. Oops, didn't want to do that. So that actually came apart with that. Actually, let's do this. Oh, I got the whole upper part. Okay. Let's see. I think I might have missed one. Let's turn this off. Go here. And I'm going to hide off this piece. There we go. There we go. Alright, so then I'll just split hidden. And then I get the shoulders. So I'll move this one up. And I'll just sort of start to organize a lot of pieces this way, right? So now that I have it separated, I can take it, you know, you could dynamesh these if you wanted to, but I'm actually not going to do that. I'm actually going to try to experiment with something. So if you ever wanted to sort of get these and ZBrush them, I'm going to actually try to ZBrush these and see if I can kind of dial them back, because if you tried to hit anything like dynamic subdivision or anything like these, a lot of the mesh would break down because it's triangulated, of course, and so it's probably going to look kind of gross around some of the edges, and it's not going to really keep its shape very well, right? So I'm going to Shift D and come out of that one. I'm actually going to hide this, and so I basically just want to work on this part. So I'm going to duplicate it, and before I'm duplicating it because I want to ZBrush one part of it, but I need to also just split down to its basic shape. So I actually want to separate the green pieces here out. So I'm going to take this, and this might seem complicated, and you can actually do this after you do most of your modeling. But it's just kind of a part that I'm doing because I want to be able to have quad-shaped stuff that I can subdivide. But I really need to make some corrections and fix some of these shapes. And it's going to turn into sort of like a rinse and repeat method, but to use ZBrusher, I need to actually group by the normal. Paul actually did a presentation. I think it was Ask ZBrush on this. So I have a shape, right? And I need to split this up. So I'm gonna actually just do this. Split mask points. And then I'm gonna Alt-click this one. And go up. That shouldn't be showing if that's separate. Ah, there we go. Okay, I see. So that's that shape, and this is this one. For some reason, it looks like they're split the wrong way, or I'm hiding everything that should be hid, but there's something showing still. Alright, so I've got that split, then I'm going to Alt-click on this one, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to hold Control and click on the green, which, as you can see, it just selects by polygroup, and then split mask points again. So that way I have 1, 2, 3 pieces, right? And then I'm going to click here and do a dynamic solo. And so what I need to do is ZBrush everything here, right? But before I do that, I'm going to come down, go to polygroups, and groups by normal. And actually, I'm going to uncheck this and see how this works out. But I'm going to try a lower setting, like 12 polygroup by normal. And as I look at the object, it should have taken every like planar area and changed it into its own like polygroup, right? So it looks like the side here kind of peeked over one poly or one tri over to the next. And you know, when I was working in Blender just a second ago, I said you probably don't want to put on a B-width on any of the shapes, because that modifier actually puts a bevel on the actual edges of everything, and it can actually toy with some of the preview, or some of the way that you're able to select faces from the side. Like, I might actually have a problem with this shape if I can't get it to dial in. I would have to mess with the numbers a little bit, but usually between 12 and 20 somewhere works. Let's try 16 and group it by normal again. Let's see. So that's pretty clean. Got some of the inside and whatnot. Let's try to ZBrush it and see what happens. So when I get to ZBrusher, I try keep groups. I'm going to turn smooth groups all the way down to 0, and I'll actually try this at 8, and I'll try adaptive somewhere high, maybe 90, and we'll see how this comes out. New Gizmo versus old transpose line. I use both all the time. Love it. Actually, Gizmo is very, 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 very handy. Is there an advantage to using each? Yeah, each of what? I'm sorry. Could you mention what you're asking about? Sunlaw03. Okay, so I'm going to move on while that's being asked, and ZBrush it and see what I get. This part takes a second, so I'm going to drink some coffee. There we go. So, maybe a little high, but for the most part it grabbed a lot of the stuff and retopologized it. So, it's just about getting your normal angle clean enough to keep a lot of the edges, and it changed some of the colors on it, but you can see where each thing, or each group that was a little bit different, it held a lot of the shape. Now sometimes it'll tweak some of the edges, but you just have to sort of do like a trial and error and sort of find what normal angle would work best for the selection, and maybe try to keep some of the shapes. I'm actually working on some ways and some numbers to maybe sort of dial in different values like this, but I end up playing with this quite a bit. Right, so if I undo it, maybe change my polygrouping normal angle a little bit differently. Oops, sorry, not that. Polygroups. So basically where I'm messing around is here, groups by normals. And actually, let me check this on and see if it would be any different. And I'm going to try something like 18. Get rid of the loop here. See if this can be any more, maybe a little bit more tight. Yeah, that's not bad. I think one of the methods that Paul mentioned also, like here where I have a group that's about the same color, even though the flat planar shape is like the same, is you can hit Q. And here's something that's kind of interesting. I'm going to go into the brush menu, and I'm going to hit the Z modeler brush and bring it up. And along the side, polys, where there's very much a planar change in between, like, say, this direction and this direction. So these flat faces, basically, I'm going to hit the space bar and polygroup, and flat, is it flat faces? Flat island. Flat inner? I think flat inner. Try flat inner. Right, and that would grab everything flat from the side. So, let's see. Yeah, see, you would have to mess around with this a little bit and try to get, like, the most absolute flat edge side of something. Every once in a while it skips some faces. Yeah. Not sure why that is. Let's see, I'll go by normal. Try this. I think that might have gotten it. They're actually different on each side, so maybe lower number. And then I'll merge similar groups. Right? And so that fairly works. So let's try Z-remeshing it one more time. I'll do adaptive at 100. Let's see. And I'll change this maybe up to 10. Keep groups. Smooth group 0. Z-remesh. I'm actually just trying to retopologize some of the parts. So in other words, like say anytime you use a parametric modeling software, and it wouldn't have to be necessarily Moi, but like any of the meshes that I take from Blender, or using HardOps, or from Moi doing parametric modeling stuff, or from Fusion, Autodesk Fusion, a lot of those meshes are going to be triangulated or either Ngon shapes, right? And since ZBrush actually kind of reads Ngons a little strangely at times, sometimes when you import things, what you'll get is a triangular face where there was an Ngon and perhaps like the face is missing, right? Because it didn't solve it, it didn't read it correctly. Blender has this a little bit less, and so when you bring in an Ngon shape, usually those Ngon shapes will hold, but to get it to another package like ZBrush, you would probably need to save it with triangulation so that it's a manifold mesh, right? Those manifold meshes, if you're doing something like 3D printing or rapid prototyping, probably they're a little bit more efficient because they're solid and they're manifold. There's no holes in that mesh, right? But here, say, if you want to sculpt on it, you can't subdivide something that's like triangulated in this fashion. So what I'll do is a lot of times I'll Z-remesh it, right? And then by the time I get a Z-remesh, oop, I had an error. So let's see here. I'm going to try something. Let's see if I can get the right number and just Z-remesh it really quick. Okay, there we go. So that's fair enough. Just for purposes of doing like some sculpting, and I have to play with this number because sometimes some of these edges will break down, and I probably needed to save this piece. I think it might have had a slight bevel on it, and so it's not as sharp as it could be. So I have to solve some of these areas. In some other pieces, I've been able to do this pretty successfully, but it's something you might have to toy with every once in a while. But for instance, let's just move on, because with this, basically, if I take the polyframes off and then just put like a dynamic subdivision on it, all of these pieces I can of course come in with clay or something and put like make damage, like all of the things that you would really want to use sculpting for, like not just the whole shapes themselves. Actually, here, there's a reason why that's going to be so slow, because you can't really sculpt with dynamic subdivision on. And so I'll just take it and let's say divide it by 2 and start to just apply it. And so now it's applying at 1.64 million polyquads. And usually a lot of the areas that have been solved, they'll smooth out really nicely. So I don't need the B width or the bevel modifier to just smooth out the object. It'll automatically solve itself. So I can use standard brushes and whatnot, and just put in like some damaged areas. I don't know why I have lazy mouse turned on. Let's turn that off. So I can dance around here and maybe create some like damaged cracks or something like that. And just use the clay. So you can kind of get into the zone with like actually putting some sculpted details over your hard surfaces, and then that looks like once you put like a little bit of procedural textures on it, it looks like actual damage, and some of the dirt maps might pick up in some of the cavities, and then that will display nicely. So and then of course by the end when you do a render, you can sort of paint in some additional details or highlights and stuff like that. Like to cut into meshes with the Damien standard a lot. You can use it with the Alt key turned on, and it'll actually lift a lot of the surface, and then you could just go back and sort of smooth it out. Sort of a nice little old trick in the book. Take a clay buildup and sort of dig a hole in here in the clay. Make it look like a armor-piercing round might have hit something and buckled some of the metal. Sort of like a ring shape, like a ballistic impact. Oh yes, Autodesk has a new auto topology thingy. Yeah, I've seen that. I haven't messed around with it. I've actually really nothing against the fellows over at Autodesk, but I'm trying to move away from Maya just a little bit and branch out. And I of course a lot of times when I teach or either a lot of times at work I have to use Maya, so it's not like you can absolutely refrain from using it, but there are other nice solutions to use. A lot of shops, they're either going to be Maya or Autodesk for 3D packages and stuff like that. But there are other places where you can do some amazing things. But yeah, a lot of the ZBrush tools, like especially, I didn't actually try it here. I should have, but there's actually two different algorithms. I think I've mentioned this, and I'm sure many others have. But you can always try to go back and try a different algorithm, because if you, in the ZBrush tab here, if you hold Alt when you click on ZBrush, it usually uses one of, I believe, two different algorithms, and it can turn out pretty nice. Sorry, I'm just taking a quick look at the chat to make sure that I'm not missing anybody's questions. So excuse me if I just stop for a second. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't miss anybody's question. Make a space station of 2001. That would be really cool. I've actually thought about that. I've been looking. I always. One of the more important things of when you're doing hard surface design is trying to make sure to look at a lot of other different sources of art, keep references, of course, for yourself, and really try to develop an eye for a lot of things. And Pinterest is awesome for that. Sometimes maybe with a few more ads than wanted, but still, it's like having your own little reference board, in browser form. Make a few little pock marks. So let's just say, for example, bring back our shapes. undo the solo and look at it. That would have been covered up, but I think you kind of get the idea. That you can actually sculpt on some of these. And then what I would do is I would just take these shapes and probably decimate them by the time I got out. Or I would have to actually bake them in maybe. So every once in a while, depending on the shape and depending on how clean it is, I can usually break them up. If there are really clean poly groups on this, I would just like take it and put UV shells on it. Just do like a unwrap from the Z plugin. I guess you could use polygroup it, of course, to do really serious polygroups, but I just want to be able to use something like the UV master and just take it and unwrap by polygroups, and that way you can get solid islands of everything. So even if you do something like this where you have subdivisional stuff and you want to bake in some of those details, you could do that. But I would probably just, if I'm going to work procedurally, I'd probably just decimate the piece. Just keep an extra copy of the original geo in the file, and then save out a duplicate, and then take that and work with it for a render, right? So just the one part. Alright. So that's kind of how you can kind of detail some of these things and actually do some really cool hard plus more organic shapes, is just basically sculpting into stuff. Giving it giving it a Z remesh, and then taking that with a few subdivision levels and start like cracking in there, with a clay or a knife, and start chopping it up a little bit to create some details. Fortunately, I didn't do this one in symmetry, but that's okay. So just as an example's sake, I think I wanted to give you that. Okay, so this would of course be more of the elongated part, but let me come back and turn some of these on. So basically I would have to just cordon off a lot of this model and bring it here into ZBrush. Use the polygroups for separating a lot of the geometry until I have all my subtools in. But let's go back for a minute. I want to add some other details to that. So, oops. Just having another look here. Want this to come down. Okay. So I'm going to go back for 1 second. Sorry. Here we go. Sorry. I'm going to cancel this. So I'm going to double tap A over in Blender and just put a few more details on this thing. I'm going to look at it from the side. Now I actually want to split and do some cuts. So almost kind of akin to doing panel looping in ZBrush. I'm going to actually use an Ingon shape and draw through the object. Oops. Holding control and clicking through. For some reason, I wonder, did it hang up? Sorry, just 1 second, please. There we go. There we go. Let's do something like this here. I'll cut there. And I'm going to do a slice, which will actually go, instead of actually cutting into the object, that red box that you saw earlier when I cut in a groove here, that's the actual cutter, and this time I'm actually going to do a box that's modified into a slice. So that's why it's highlighted in yellow, and I'm going to hit Shift and click on it so that I can actually keep the shape that I cut through live. So basically when you look at it and you rotate it, this is my shape through here, right? And it's actually cutting through this, and when I save it out, it'll actually be a separate piece, right? So I'm going to hide the actual cutter piece, and what I'm left with is the actual score going through. Actually, let's undo that one time because I just need to fix this geo. I'm going to tab in. Every once in a while, you get like an extra edge, and it causes an error in the geo. So I'm going to take this, and just select this, and actually, oops, hit X, dissolve an edge, and there's an overlapped edge over there, which was causing a little pinched tear in the geo, and so just fix it. Just a small thing. Let's see. So I'm going to hide this, Still looking clean. And then let's take box shape again. Select this one. Cut through here. Right, and cut a groove into there. And here's another one. I'm going to take this shape and we're going to do a box from here. And this is a cutter box, except this one I'm going to bevel it. And I'm going to use my scroll wheel to come all the way down. I'm going to adjust the bevel there. I'm going to keep it this way. Side view, rotate it. So we're matching the other angle. There we go. And this shape, of course, I could edit this shape by its poly edge. And change even the shape of this. You know, like if you wanted to add a loop through the center, you probably could, and then pull and extract, you know, faces upwards and out. And it would, as long as you continue the design, the cutter is still live, and it should be able to come out of the shape, almost like what I'm drawing in the Ingon, using the Ingon tool, right? So basically, D is like Ingon, box, and circle, and I just select the different types of cutters that I want and use it on the object, and then hold Control, and it cuts it out. Right, so I'm going to hide this. So I think something like this is cool. So, of course, if I move this around in Blender all out of place, the modifier is not moving with it because I've hidden those shapes. So I need to actually just select this really quick. And what I'll do is I'll hide the collections, get out the in panel, and I'll use another nice little tool for Blender called batch operations, which basically just handles a lot of the modifiers and stuff like that. So like the bevel that I put on, I want to make sure to turn it off. So actually let me take this one. And for bevels, I'm actually going to hide them, disable, right? And all of the booleans, I'm actually going to maybe just right click on this object here, batch modifiers, and apply. And so all of the modifiers for this object will be applied, right? Whenever you want to manage your modifiers, you can always hit Control tilde on a keyboard, or I guess HardOps has their own thing here where you can just probably have to grab, sorry, your, where'd it go? Sorry, mesh tools, and under the modifier helper. And this is basically the stack of what your modifiers looks like, right? And at any time, you know, if you wanted to turn some off or on, you can always just hit this little computer screen icon here, monitor icon, which displays it and toggles it on and off, right? So, anyway, I've already applied it to this object, so that should be unchanged, and then I can just move it into place, sort of compose it right there. Take this one, and I would probably do the same, but let's, oh yeah, that's a different shape. Okay, cool. Yep. So that's kind of how I would make a few cuts onto some of these. Let's go back. And I want to show you this really quick. So before we were putting a little bit of a material in here. I just want to dial that in really quick because I want to resave my model and bring it in here with new cuts. Oops. First of all, let's hide this guy. Move this out of the way. Derp. Put that back. There we go. Sorry. I was trying to move some things around as far as nodes go, and every once in a while I accidentally disconnect them. So in other words, whenever you're working in Octane, just for those that might be starting off with it, like if you hold Control, you can cut connections between a lot of the nodes. I know nodes is probably hard for many to kind of get working in a node-based application, but it's actually really not that hard. You just try to think on a more basic level of all of the different connections to things, and just gradually connect things slowly, so that you kind of understand what connections are affecting what. Sometimes I have to spread them out and I reorganize them. I think opacity should be 0 for that light, 0 for that one, 0 for that one. Okay, and we have our ramp in the back. So basically what you're looking at is you have your model, which is an imported OBJ, right? And those go into placement nodes that then go into geometry groups, right? And sometimes you can have more than one input for a geometry group. So like if you see when I click on the geometry group, if I add an input, this would be where I could actually tie in another element or model. So like if I wanted to break up different pieces of different models, I could always come here and I could actually look at how many different material IDs I have on one OBJ, and then once I come up with a color scheme, I just basically click on every different material type, and I can actually just start to fix different parameters for each, right? And the color is built in, right? So if I work here, I can keep some general colors, and then maybe I could keep each as a material and have that color when I go to some place like substance, or want to do, if I had UVs on the model, and I want to put more detail in, or just you can dial in each specific thing, right? So you have a lot of nice built-in control to work from. So also I want to change some lighting stuff. So let's see if I change the time, maybe a little bit brighter. So I'm going to make this actually 11.3, so 1130-ish light, maybe a little bit brighter. That way also some of the specular highlights might show up a little bit more. I'm going to choose this specular light and power, so if I wanted to bring back the spec a little bit, and I'm going to use the UV and bring up that texture that was on there a little bit bigger. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. There we go. So now you can actually start to see a little bit more of some of the grunge texture that was on this. Oops, shouldn't use my... Yeah. Front view. Sorry about that. I think I messed up my view and did something to the camera. I think I accidentally messed up its focus somehow. Actually, here, let's just reopen this. I should be able to go back to the same camera and just autofocus, but for some reason I think I misclicked something, so let's just reopen it. It's not so bad. No. There we go. And I'll just click on the render target to bring it back again. And so I might have to make a few other little changes like I did before, but basically that's sort of the sum of how I'm rendering this. Didn't want to take up too much time, because we have about 30 minutes left. And so I'm going to keep actually developing this, because there are some other things that I'm finishing off. But I want to show you guys one more thing. go back to ZBrush really quick. Since I believe I showed previews of it, and actually, if you follow me on Instagram and or Gumroad or ArtStation, you might have seen it. Actually, I might have not posted to ArtStation yet, but I want to open up another previous Mac that I did in the same fashion as this, except in this case I think I probably did a little bit more bashing inside of ZBrush, but I want to show you how some of the first mechs that I was doing, that I showed at the top of the hour, show how some of those were sort of composed. And let's see, recent files. Oh, here we go. This guy. Yeah, Blender does do some really cool stuff. How often do I use the Z modeler brush? I use it quite a lot, actually, almost for everything, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start blocking things out in ZBrush alone, and so, you know, I'm one of those concept artists who likes to work on like a very flat, angular level at first for a lot of hard surface shapes, and so when my blockouts look really, really simple, right? Or use, you know, just like a lot of combined geometry of a lot of small, you know, blocks that I'll start cutting, and I just try to think of most of the shape play that I will design as like one solid box, right, along a grid. And if I can think that way, I can, let's just say metaphorically, take a butter knife or a carving knife and start shaving off pieces or shaving off different angles until I have a refined shape, and then later a sculpted shape. And sometimes in between that I might re-topologize so that I can better suit the shape that I'm trying to make, and then once I have that template, I can make a more finished hardware piece from. So, you know, like, this is something that I've actually probably used a lot of Kitbash pieces for, and the blockout was fairly simple, right? But what I was looking for was the actual silhouette of the object. And I know many times in a, you know, speaking on design philosophy, you know, when I'm trying to actually talk more about some of the features of ZBrush, it's kind of a weird toss-in, but it's also a good thing, because you know, you can really try to up the game of your sensibilities by making different parts work, and it's a lot of it tends to be like a lot of problem solving. So I basically problem solve all of the shapes that I want to try to achieve, right? And with this mech, I'm actually trying to think of the features along with it. So I had to design like a fully featured hand that could be moved, and then, you know, there, you know, stuff for the joints. And then I hand it to a friend of mine now who's rigging, and pretty soon I'm working on a project where I may have some motion to show you guys later, because a lot of these maps or mechs that I'm building right now are for a small, sort of tentatively secret project that I'm building with a friend, and we're trying to actually put some animation and motion to a lot of these models. So this is kind of crazy, but all of these models, if you look at them, a lot of them still have their original triangulation in them, because when I needed to import them from Blender or elsewhere into ZBrush, I needed to triangulate the parts. Some of the parts actually have quad subdivisional stuff in it, and so between, you know, the mix of that and actually triangulating a few things, all of this geometry actually can work in real time in Eevee. So it's almost like a lot of the topology does and doesn't matter, because there's some parts that are going to be pretty efficient, and then there's some that, you know, you don't need to deform or move them so much, so they're not going to flex as a material, they're not going to deform, and hopefully they won't intersect with each other too badly. So, you know, when we were taking it and putting a rig on it, actually everything was able to move pretty smoothly and be rendered in real time in Eevee, without having to do topology or even seriously do UVs. Like we're doing totally 100% procedural with rigs on some of these meshes, and they handle just fine. Especially if you have something, you know, like a good card, you know, maybe like a Pascal series TI card or higher, like a 2080 Ti, I guess is the new deal. You know, they work fine on rendering. But any of these, of course, you know, as I was mentioning and showing earlier, you can take any of the polygroups and wrangle them in ZRemesher and do a remesh, right? I actually have some pieces, probably in the next month, I will probably be done with a new set of hard surface pieces that I'm working up. It's sort of like a Kitbash set or IMM. And so those will be designed kind of using the workflows that I've been talking about today. And in them, I'm going to ZRemesh them and optimize the pieces so that, you know, all you need is like maybe 1 or 2 subdivision levels to get them really looking nicely done. So look forward to that. But yeah, I mean, I can sculpt on any of this. So there's another piece here. I think I might open this one in Blender for you really quick. I'm gonna save this here. Good thing about Blender I like using, and I hope I don't want to oversell this one, but I can open multiple instances of this package really nicely. So if I have more than one element that I need to work with and then shoot towards ZBrush, I can open 2 windows. So let's see, actually, I'm going to open up model here to show you guys. Here is another thing that I think I've been working on, and I'm excited about this one because I showed you guys in probably one of my previous streams I was making a sort of big dog styled walker, and I was doing all of the block out here totally in ZBrush, and I wanted to come back and, you know, after I did some details and probably I was testing a few workflows out, but you would probably ask, well, how did I get the decals on this one? So this is some really fun stuff that I've been doing between ZBrush and EV, as taking and doing a lot of the hard ops shapes, but all of the shapes here originated from ZBrush using the Z modeler, right? Only at a certain point when I need maybe secondary and tertiary forms, then I skip over to Blender and I do a few other things. And very recently I've been working on a cool set of sort of bashable decals, and so like all of the decals you see here in EV are all planes, but you can actually take these transparent PNGs, and I wouldn't see why you wouldn't be able to use them anyplace else, right? So as long as you have an app that can bring in a transparent PNG, even I believe with Spotlight within ZBrush, you could probably paint a lot of these decals in, and I've made these available on my Gumroad page. So if you guys have a chance, check them out, because there's some really cool stuff in there, not only for decals to put on your model, but I've come up with an entire series that you can use also for like HUD displays. And so when it comes down to rendering it, you can always take the frames and do some really cool sort of like 3D holographic effects, you know, putting like little sprites in and around a model, and they're all just like cards that have been fitted to the decal size, right? This is literally just sitting on top of the geometry, which is a really cool part, right? It looks like it's a part, but it's actually its own shape, you know, and so you could actually just adjust it and move it around. To do this in ZBrush, all you would have to do is probably bring in the image into Spotlight and just paint it on with your poly paints on top of the object, or sort of like projecting it, right? And so there's that. So let's see, I'm gonna take the last 20 minutes here and just sort of like go freestyle and show you guys a few things from this. All right, so any questions? Anybody want to can you dig it? Are you cool with it? Anybody have any questions, like what did I just watch? Please let me know. Let me move around the various windows to chat to make sure I'm not missing anybody's questions. Yes. Okay, so let me just answer something about transpose really quick. So A lot of times when I use the gizmo and I use the transpose just to cover bases, W is usually the key that I start with to sort of affect a lot of these, only because, you know, rotation is implied, you know, by the widget itself. So even if I'm using the move tool to move one specific thing, you know, I just hit W first, right? But if you have things that are grouped together, or you know, maybe the objects, the subtools might be merged, but you have different polygroups. Like say if I come over here and I look at this, okay, so there's various polygroups on this object, but if I wanted to pluck out one particular shape and separate it, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll hit Control and then click on the polygroup, which will select and mask off everything else, right? And then I either split the mask point, or you know, you can do a group split really quick, which will take every polygroup and make it a separate subtool. That might get a little tedious as there are a lot of like fine pieces here, right? So you know, I think you can also use it to select more than one polygroup and mask off and change things. But generally, what I either do is toggle by hiding the object or splitting it, right? So either you can do like a split masked points, group split, and also I believe split hidden is what I use. But that's only when, say, right, sorry, I'm going to go back to Q, which is the regular edit mode, and then I'm going to hold Alt Shift. Oops, sorry, not Alt Shift. Control Shift, right? Which will single that polygroup off, and then I could take it and I can actually just split it off by splitting the hidden, right? So there's various ways where you can just kind of single out your objects and separate them if necessary, so that you can edit that one element, or you know, all of the elements together, that sort of thing. So here I have these that are actually kind of on a rotational arm. I think later I updated this mesh so that there's a piece in here, and the missile pods would rotate, the arms would rotate, they would expand outward. I think we might have changed a few things on the torso, but pretty much this model is as is. And let me actually show you this, because looking at it finished is really quite impressive. But yeah, just as a start, this is exactly the sort of thing that I'm sort of building up. This is actually kind of halfway. I haven't finished this model yet. There's a lot of connective, you know, bits that I wanted to do for the legs and the head. So it's kind of one of the models that I'm rotating and working on in between working on work stuff and other things. So let me open this up. See this one. Yes, yeah, like extruding out a single edge. That also is something else that you can do. Sorry if I didn't finish the process there, but pretty much, let's say, for example, I take a cube, I make Polymesh 3D with it, and I go down and I initialize it into a Q-cube. 2x2x2 is fine, right? And I would usually start by taking something like this. Let's see. Hit X. Okay, so there we go. What is that? That's my front. Right? So from the front end, just go in, B, Z, hitting the Z modeler, and then everything that I'm doing, I'm affecting by either face, with a face menu, edge by edge menu, and or the vertice, so by the point, right? So a lot of times when I'm editing stuff, I'll just say do nothing for this, and maybe for the edge do nothing, and I just want to operate using the faces. And if I do like a single poly or something like that, and I hold Alt, I can select a group of polys and, you know, edit that. So like maybe Q mesh, quarter step, pull this out, pull it out again, pull this out, and then maybe look at it from the side and do a lot of editing this way where I make a mask of the actual vertice and then invert it, and then that's where I use this widget, and if I hold Alt I can actually bring it over and put it on a specific point, and then I can you know, just do this to move the poly around, and so that whole edge and group of polys is selected, right? And I can just totally block stuff out that way. It's actually kind of a little bit slower because I have to make sure that I mask off a group of vertices and then move that row. But I mean, it's sort of a means to an end sort of thing for me, I guess. But I can also take, you know, specifically the Z modeler brush and probably just move by the edge and just select these and just move them. And sometimes you can make some nice contours from that. Alright, and then just keep going. Build up a shape. Select these. Maybe Q mesh it again. Take also lasso, mask lasso, which is handy. Flip it, and then maybe by this poly group, actually, hold on a second. Flip that, and then hit W, and then I can scale this in and push it back out a little bit, and so forth and so on. So each time I do that, I do like a little bit of an extrude, and then I can of course hit D to look at the dynamic subdivision, and of course, you know, you can always scale that back a little bit and see how it's forming up on each subdivision level, right? So I mess with the dynamic subdiv a lot. So 3, maybe 4, right? And then I can really push this shape out. I can actually just take and use a move brush. I can probably start pulling some of these out. It's almost like using NURBS, right? And you look at it and you're like, God, what is this blob? But I mean, something like this is, if I'm just looking at the shape and I'm trying to figure out like a nice, like sort of contour shape, right? And it's not very smooth. I mean, it's smooth, but it's not very hardened, right? I mean, what we would expect from a hard surface shape. But, of course, when you take this, let's come out of Dynamic Subdiv, hitting Shift-D. This is kind of funky, but I could just smooth it out. There we go. And I could move very specific small polys around. Right? Just as an example's sake. And then I could just use the same tools under the Q, excuse me, B, Z, hit the space bar, so along the edges, do some creasing. And I'm just going edge by edge, but you could actually go by the complete edge loop. I just want to test out some of this and see if I can maintain a hard shape out of it. Right? And then if I hit D again, I get a shape like this. And I could actually use something like this as a, maybe sort of like a slate object for like doing, or a proxy object for doing more complex things with bevels, or excuse, not bevels, but booleans. So like if I gave it subdivision and then maybe killed that subdivision and then come back and start using like a smart object or something like that, we go. So there we go. And that could be used as a base shape or something. And I could probably turn this into like Dynamesh and just start using a clip brush or something like that. And then ZRemesh it, and it would be a nice little formed piece. Or just keep working the actual polys themselves until I get it cleaned up into a contour that's ready, right? Any of these little handles here, these little modifier handles, you can pull and affect the shape, right? So, oops. Let's see, I don't want to do anything around the face, so I'll say do nothing. I'll just pull this. Let's see, point action, don't want to move. There we go. Yeah, like extruding, or a single edge, or edge loop. Of course, oops, I just moved out some creasing, but of course, you know, yeah, you can do things like along the edge, you can insert, adding more geometry to these things. Right? Like I could see this being like maybe a mech part. Maybe release some of these creases. Like for creases, of course, all you have to do, if you're holding crease on an edge, is hit Alt and it'll take it out, and it'll remove it along whatever expanse you had it. Like say edge or edge loop partial, edge loop complete. A lot of times when I just want to get quick flow, like in the old days, I believe like back in as far as like ZBrush 4, when it dropped. You know, you would have to like single out polys by using a lasso tool. So like you'd have to do something like this, and then select the edges, and then you have to crease this independent of the other stuff, and then you know do that for all your hard shapes. Now you don't have to do that. Thank God. Thank God for ZModeler brush. It was a godsend for this, because that was so meticulous and used to take so much time. Yeah, now you can just straight up mess with Geo like you would in any other package, right? Qmesh, single poly. So I can get these guys and extrude that up, right? And then I'll crease this edge and this one. Oops. I think my faces need to be set to do nothing. Oops. Save. In fact, let's put and then let's see if I can do like a crease here. There we go. One here, one here. Coming out of this again. So I have like a crease that goes up along that side, and then if I hit dynamic subdiv again, at least it's going to be creased along there. But you could use this as like sort of a chopping block to sort of build some shapes from, right? Because let's say for example, take subdivision off, and I'm going to hit BI, and I'm going to grab M. Do another Qmesh, look at it from above, take a lot of these shapes, separate it, move this down, take and make that start object. Come down here. Actually, sorry, I need to go to render, turn on live boolean from the render boolean, and then this, you know, if I made it an intersecting piece, you know, that's the geo, and move this. Oops, sorry, until you get that, move that inward, and now you can kind of see how deep it's going into the object, but it's also cutting a boolean because it's using the live boolean, right? And so I'll hide this again, Shift F to hide the polygroups, hiding the object, and you know, I can move this around and sort of do exactly what I was doing in Box Cutter, right? Of course, using this as a cutter shape, if I affect the shape differently in the same way, like let's say for example I look at this as a polygroup, and I do that. Actually, let's just put like a few loops around, like reinforcement loops around the edges, or even crease it, you know. What did I want to do here? I wanted to do that and then just do an insert. So I'm just putting like a simple reinforcement edge loop around the corners so I can divide it. And then now with that turned on, I can hide the polygroups, make that a difference, right? Probably I need to actually apply this, so I'm going to apply it, right? And then you can freeze it or whatever, but I'm going to take this and move it back into the shape, see what happens. First this, I'm actually going to hit D on that, so that we can get it smooth again. And I'll go ahead and apply the subdivisions. And I'll go back to this, hit W, and move it into here, and see what kind of cut it makes when I switch this over to difference, right? And so now you could, if you look in here, the bevel that was on the inside is nice and round, and it's just because it's used that subdivided bevel on the inside. But I'm sure when you ZBrush things, you could always probably take a shape and add a bevel to it, so like, you know, not only just the cutter object, but the actual object yourself. You could probably come over to crease, and on the whole, you know, thing, just put like a nice bevel. So let's say 0.55. Ah, yeah, we need to freeze it. So probably bring it down to here, and I'll delete higher, and I'll bevel. Nah, still. Probably have to delete lower. There we go. And there we go. Probably I could have selected a group of faces or something, but at least it beveled the edges to look at. Alright. So you could do something like this, and then commit it, and then start sculpting that up. Maybe crease some of the edges and keep a nice sharp bevel along these edges. Any of the same thing, but basically that's the premise of how all of this is working. Is I'm just using like bevel cuts, and then I make like a boolean mesh, like a union mesh from this after I have like a lot of complex shapes. And so basically, again, I'm just looking at an object where I'm cutting into that shape. And the same thing sort of happens over on the box cutter side. All right, so one quick look, and then probably I'm gonna run out of time here. Boy, 2 hours goes faster than I usually thought. But I wanted to show you guys this. This is the completed model. It's been probably about since over the holidays. Which, by the way, I never said Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy 2019, the year of the Blade Runner. I'm so thrilled. It's like one of the big coincidences about this year that I'm like thrilled about. Because I'm a huge fan of Blade Runner. So, cool. Anyway, I'm gonna look at this with a rendered view. This might take a second because There's a lot of objects, a lot of material spread around. Change that light there. And there we go. There we go. So I'm gonna deselect everything plus the light so I don't mess up the file. And then I can just rotate this. Sweet. So I have a couple of area lights set in this just for the scene. That's what these little stemmed objects are here. Probably because I built it, I'm actually working underneath the grid plane. But I just arranged the objects with 2 ramps that have been duplicated around the side. So you have a ramp off to the front and back, and then just like 3 lights, just to get some interesting lights. Maybe 1 in back as well, just sort of like area lights. Area lights and spotlights, sorry. So once I find sort of like, you know, lighting that's interesting, I'll just place the models and rotate them a little bit. But yeah, this is what they look like with materials bought on. So everything in here was done, you know, ZBrush and hard ops together, probably. Alright, a few different kitbashes, you know, just borrowed pieces just to finish off some of the composition, but all of them worked out geometry wise, and they can, next time I hope I can show you guys how this stuff looks in real time, because that would be really, really cool. In motion, in real time, animated. Alrighty guys, so lastly let me just finish up a couple of questions here. Let's see. Maya style extruding in ZBrush? I would seriously look into the Z modeler brush, because usually you could just select faces and then pull those out, and you can either do an extrude or you can do a Q mesh. Thing with Q mesh is it's really cool is just lastly I want to answer this one because it's kind of an interesting question. Let's say I'm gonna append a box, right? In this box, I'm going to turn the other 2 things off. This box is a very special box. No, I'm kidding. Come down here, and I initialize it, right? And let's say I had one pushed off to this side, and then I duplicate it, and I mirror it, right? As in 2 different objects, right? So, let's just duplicate it. And I'll use deformations mirror. And I'll turn both on, right? So you have 2 things from 2 different sides. Now let's say if I merge this down, right? So they're on the same subtool, and then I want to start to edit some of this using QMesh. So of course, Z modeler brush, and then if I'm using X symmetry, and if I tap on it over the face or hover over the face, and I say QMesh, and I'm going to pick a specific. I'm going to pick a specific distance, so like maybe just 10th step. And I pull this out. It's actually going to snap, and it should snap and weld itself together. Maybe I might have it wrong, but generally you should be able to take out 2 parts and pull them together, and they'll snap and they'll actually weld together, right, and join them. So that's kind of cool. You could work on 2 different pieces on both sides, and as long as you have symmetry on, you can just pull off a nice shape. So like here and here, you know, you can make one more expanse. So you have the loop, and then you could take and do this and this, and highlight those, pull them, and they should snap together, right? And there you go, right? And so a lot of times I'll build hard shapes out of this. The extrudes and how they react in edge mode, yes. Yeah, some of it is a little bit non-conventional to how you would, I mean, if you can just kind of think of your how you're pulling shapes apart and how they're affected a little bit differently than, say, a lot of other different 3D packages, then it's not so bad, not so hard. Bevels operates a little bit different, but I think there's a workaround for a lot of the problems that you would probably find with bevels. A single edge, I don't know. I've never really tried to pull out a single edge. That might be a little bit different. Maybe if you could just affect. See, that gets dangerous. I wonder. I would actually be afraid of creating a double face if that happens. And if that happens, then I would just take one face individually and see if you could delete it. Or skip over to another package and then use the same mesh and start modeling from it, and then bring it back into ZBrush and just re-import it. Yeah, because even if it was made as a Q mesh, the Q mesh is still a poly mesh. You can edit it, you know, either in ZBrush or outside of it, and get just about the same result. You know, if we're talking about edges, faces, and polys. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Looks like I've hit a little over the mark by 5 minutes, but thank you for joining me, everyone, today. I look forward to, as soon as I can, get back in here and really get to it. And of course, I still try to record things so I can keep up with showing you guys things. So keep in tune with, like, either me over Facebook or ArtStation, or perhaps even Instagram, because I keep a pretty regular blog on Instagram where I give a lot of previews of projects like this that I'm working on. Alright, everybody, have a good weekend. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And, you know, hit me up sometime if you guys have any questions. I always try to get back to people if I notice the questions right away. And, yeah, stay tuned, stay cool. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining me. Cheers. Have a good weekend.